Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Cherry Chunks, where I'm Cherry, and I'm taking up a chunk of your time. So where we last left off, the chapter was taking forever, and this is the current state of where we're at. We're trying to take on the moon. Moon things. It's not the real moon, but close enough, right? So let us continue on with the thing. Leave a like, subscribe, and sit back and enjoy my narration of Witch on the Holy Night. Blue flame shot forth at a critical level, but the ice would neither melt nor mar. No amount of sheer heat could make a dent in something formed such a colossal amount of energy. The toll on her circuit sent them berserk, and blood began to run free. The battle had become a tussle over the magical energy that filled the park. From the very beginning, this had been the Snark's home turf. The Snark had control over at least 80% of the space, while Algo had 20 at best. The castle of ice descended as if to call the match. All she could do was delay the inevitable. She knew that she had been backed into a wall, and right now the only thing she could do was to keep firing. Then again, perhaps not. There was another option. If she converted all of her magical energy into a defense, there was a tiny chance, no, not a tiny, a great possibility, in fact, that she could save just her... Clinging to that broken hope, Alko continued to rotate her circuits. Time seemed to stop at the magical energy overdose. A second of intense pain lasted an eternity. Then amidst everything, something approached one step at a time. Something from among the park's shadows. Something. She felt goosebumps from head to toe. This issue was no longer the ice overhead. In the midst of the stillness, the Red Death grew closer, step by ominous step. Her circuits in her mind began to rupture out of terror. Composition of her formula in her soul began to rip apart. There it was, just behind her. Its footsteps came to a halt. It reached around and cupped her face in its blood-stained hands. She wanted to scream out with all her might. This is it. Nothing matters. I couldn't care less. Run or don't run, it doesn't matter. Quit hiding and reveal yourself. Use whatever you can and show no mercy. That was it. She had one final card to play. Once a miracle had been gifted to her almost as a joke. It made the ice look like child's play. That was what the Red Death had come to kill. Using it would spell ruin. Not using it would mean death by ice. Then why hesitate? There was no conditions on its use. There was no price to pay for its power. She simply would cease to be herself. That was all. Humans love to exist in the areas of gray. Dozens of electrical impulses disconnected in their brains every minute. Nothing lasts forever, not even oneself. It was not anything particularly worthy of disdain. It was not even anything remarkably worth of being called taboo. What escaped her lips now was rage, bewilderment from the red silhouette. The girl let out an inaudible scream. Could true magic truly be her savior? What an opportunistic What an opportunist load of bull. After all, to begin with. Indeed, Helga was still in the dark when it came to that magic, whatever it was. She woke from her momentary hallucination, the very illusion her breaking soul had shown her. Whining had the opposite effect on her. Her pride was now ablaze. Shojiro was right. Her opponent had put her in check, but she had done the same to it. It was clear why she was losing, so now all she needed was a counterplan well within her abilities. No matter the odds, she was not one to give up without giving it one last shot. Her numbed fingers clenched into a tight fist. She was betting against the house, an unrealistic gamble that should have made her question her sanity. And her first step was off by an inch. Her body would instantly be vaporized. But she knew a boy who never fled. She knew of a steadfast courage that could shine its light no matter how small, through a desperate situation. Yes, there was more than just herself to be concerned about. If the ice fell, that would mean the destruction of the park in its entirety. Everything he had achieved, everything he had risked and dared and happily put his life on the line for would all be for naught. Determination and confidence surged through her like electricity. She was in no mood to be crushed by a giant sheet of ice. If she was going to lose, she'd rather do so at a Grand Fest firework possible. Alka was a sore loser. At this point, she would rather burn herself to cinders and let it decide her end. Senji! She grunted in pain. Energy raged through her body. Her circuits were on the verge of disintegration. Inscribed upon her body, her magic crest was magecraft given physical form. It did not, however, stop with simply skin and flesh. It burrowed into the very marrows of her bone. A playful smile graced her lips. Her sense of reason had been turned upside down by the pain. That was only natural. She had to praise her own body for holding out so long while pushed beyond its limits. The Skullface noticed the abnormality. It finally recognized the challenge for dominance over this space. It laughed at the conceit it faced. Never did it expect the magician to challenge the great flat snark, lord of vessels over a millennium, and in such an age of decline. She tried to catch her breath. She braced herself for the coming pain. She was going to smash that ice to pieces. Both had access to the same amount of magical energy. One of them was greatly outmatched, but... The feedback would go beyond anything she had experienced to date. Quite simply, her decision went beyond recklessness. She expanded both formula to maximize size. The first layer would transform into a giant vortex swallowing up the mist. The second layer would precede it from one end and pump it into her barrel.
私の想定が甘かった。撃ち落とすなんて半端もいいとこ。この場合、跡形もなく打ち砕くった。
Primeval power answered the spellcaster's conviction. It formed a pattern of a writhing serpent. Voiceless magical power flew a banner of revolution. Now, look upon the earth, O venerable one. See now this pioneer, the first among the trailblazers. She embodies a species that knows no fear, that renders not all manner of mystics and tradition.
貸し借りはここまでよ。嘘つきブーちゃん。お望み通り、のしをつけて返してあげる。
From the newest magician commands the principles of consumption and extinction. An aberrant bullet of light melted through the castle of ice. The barrel held fast. Her control of the magical energy was divine. 100,000 miles of veins, equal to about 2.5 times the circumference of Earth, hungrily drank in the magical energy. The subsequent magical strike hurtled straight up at the moon. No, 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 no. Death rose from the moon's surface. A cry of indignant terror echoed through the abandoned park. Reality was burned into the eyes of this creature of fantasy. To Alco, its famed struggle was a taste of victory. Victory despite her absolute reckless use of magical energy. The energy scales had been tipped to their breaking point, but nevertheless in her favor.
ブラックライトスターボ一気にぶち抜け
Shatter, 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 shatter. The skyscraper scattered into atomized dust. The island it's unattainably extolled had swallowed whole the despair of its many challengers. Long, it proudly eluded mankind's intellect. Yet now, azure mist bemoaned its demise. In the sky, the icy canopy crumbled. The snark-hunting bullet jumped over the moon. In the throes of death sounded like the roaring sea, reverberating across this fairy tale land. The battle was over. The thick fog dissipated and the scattering ice melted away before it hit the ground. A lethal bullet unseated the Night King from its throne, affording him no time to grieve his loss. The oil of the moon, the untouched flat snark, the dreamscape that had begun with its resurrection ended with its demise, drawing a close to the nightmare. But what happened to Humpty Dumpty?
Ugh, さすがに無茶だわ。
Flat on her back, Elko looked up at the night sky. She lay there, perfectly still, not able to move a single finger. When she tried, her old body screamed out in agony. She was completely empty of magical energy, and her magic crest had come to a halt. She estimated that she would likely require a whole day to recover all of her bodily functions. Sadly, all she could really do in that moment was take a breath. At least her chest was swelling with pride. She had gone toe-to-toe with a fairy tale monster and had emerged victorious. The battlefield conditions had favored her, it was true, but there was no denying that Elko had come a long way in the last 6 months.
それはそれとして、 アリスには謝っとかないと。プロイって壊したらそれっきりだものね。
Flat Snark would never again return to this world. It was an insanely rare item, so invaluable that it would have been impossible to price it for auction at the Association in London. Alco had sent Alice's priceless treasure to oblivion. Needless to say, things had gotten more than a little out of hand.
まあ。
They had both agreed to the fight, so Alice probably would not complain. Even if she was furious, she would never be so undignified as to show it. The second Alco relaxed, her fatigue finally caught up with her. She did everything in her power to fight over the overwhelming drowsiness. Aside from a few minor internal injuries, her body was miraculously unscathed. She felt like she could probably stand up and dust herself off after a bit of rest. The golden moon continued to burn bright in the night sky.
正体は油だものね。そりゃいつまでも燃え。
Alco's bleary eyes went wide in astonishment. She was still unable to lift a finger.
そっか。スナークを見つけたベイカーも最後は一緒に消えるんだっけ。
She sighed in resignation. Alco accepted that her final stand left her with only 10 seconds before she burned to ash too. Elsewhere, just a short moment prior, buffeted by strong winds atop the roller coaster, Shojiro gravely peered down at the ground. All he could muster was a single murmur. You could see Alco on top of some drawing on the ground and...
なんだあれ。いくらなんでも頑丈すぎないか。
In the distance, there was something familiar in the direction of the ruined House of Mirrors. Shojiro's job to throw Alco's hair from a great height was complete. While not the most impressive of attacks, it was absolutely a matter of life or death. On top of it, just thinking about how he was going to get back down to the ground was making him dizzy. He had experienced more than enough trouble from one day.
いや、でも。
He was flustered as he shot up. He stood up atop the swaying bridge. A skull suddenly appeared in the night sky above. On the ground, he could see a circling blue light that Alco Ozaki in the middle of it. And one more thing. From an angle that only Shojiro could see, a shadow stalked Alco while she challenged the moon. It was shaped like a person missing the lower half of its body. The disassembled torso slowly crawled its way towards Alco. They were still over 600 feet apart. Unfortunately for Alco, she completely failed to notice this approaching from behind.
遠くて見えないけど、あれは?
He was sure of what it was now. There was only one thing in that park that would chase Alco, and not him, the puppet.
いや、でも、ほら、あるいは、ひょっとして。
His mind reigned in circles. It was a perfectly reasonable reaction. Any grip on reality he might have was long lost when Alco started firing beams of light at a monstrous moon. Alco's mercilessly fired buffeted the roller coaster like a storm. Just standing on it was almost enough for him to be thrown off and killed. At any rate, Shojiro couldn't fathom the same situation. Should he head back to the entrance of the roller coaster and warn Alco about the incoming threat? No, there was no way he would make it in time. And to make matters worse, there was a horde of bread down there waiting for him. And it may well be the case that Alco was already aware of the puppet and would take it out as soon as they got closer. If she was, Shojiro was sure he could only be in the way. It did not seem like there was anything he could do to help. And beyond that, Alco was not the only one in danger. He was quite in a predicament himself. The road home was never as safe as one thought. It was as true here as it had been in the mountains. The path that he was on was no exception. As risky as the ascent had been, it was even more dangerous to go back down. This was no time to be worrying about others. His shaking legs reminded him that only 200 feet separated him from death.
大丈夫。それは分かっている。
His head was pounding. This was reckless and stupid. Having been raised in the mountains, he was more sensitive to danger than anyone raised in the city. And just thinking about what he was about to do made his throat seize up. There was only one thing he could say for sure.
青崎のことだ。あれに絶対気づいていない。
With a sobbing shout, Shojiro started making his way down the 200-foot frame of the roller coaster. His race towards death accelerated. He never meant to speed up, but the downward slope held him forward. It was too late for regrets. Now that he was running, he had no choice but to go even faster. And time was not on his side. He would never make it in time if he took the long way down. Never mind the bread man crowding toward the exit of the roller coaster. With the XX blocks, the outcomes would be the same. But if he went slowly or quickly, there was no reason to rush to his death as desperately as he did. So what if it was futile? Shojiro cleared the doubts from his mind. As he turned his attention to what he could do, keep his footing and try to arrive at the bottom as quickly as he could.
間違えるな。今大事なのは間に合うとか助けられるとかそういう結果の話じゃなくて。
He had no idea what impulses were driving his stiff limbs. He just focused at the moment, pushing past the fear of the cold logic. At his core, he was the kind of person to deal with problems head on. There would be time to think about the consequences later. But hesitation was not his only obstacle.
こんな時に
This worst possible hindrance appeared at a time when not focusing on the track would mean certain death. Tojiro sensed something wrong with the egg had been so studiously observing out of that one eye. Something had changed. And at the very moment he realized it,
よそ見してる場合じゃない。
Tojiro stumbled, then instinctively caught himself. It was a miracle he had not fallen. Descending the roller coaster on foot was an act of suicide. The egg stayed right by his side, so close that it would collide with him. Though he was trying not to look at it, he could not help but feel uneasy that the door-like decoration in its center was gradually opening.
ああ、もうちくしょう。
He cursed his rotten situation, and yet he refused to slow down. He ran even faster, glaring at the egg on his side.
本当、おかしい。こんな状況なのに。なんで
Shojiro was baffled to find that he was smiling. Perhaps it had something to do with Aoko's charm. Shojiro could not tell one way or the other. He could still feel Aoko's fingers on his skin. The trust and expectation she had placed with him etched into his heart. But what spurred him on was something entirely different. All this stemmed from a much deeper problem. It was something inside him that he could not understand at the time, but would eventually come to terms with one day.
よし、距離は今なら2メートル弱。
He carefully judged the distance as he ran down the track of death. But the distance between what? That went without saying. It was the distance between himself and the one thing that could save his life. He told himself he was going to do it over and over like a mantra. Sojiro could not believe himself. What he was about to do was incredibly stupid. But what is stupid when smart is not an option?
本当、なんでそこまでやるんだ。
Amidst it all, he laughed at how pointless such self-reflection was now. Temporary confusion and a psychological thrill ride both had laid his soul bare. What really mattered in life? The answer to that question was simple. His primitive values did not crave success or reward. All he wanted was
よし。
to live the way he wanted. It wasn't an obligation to the people around him. His desire to live his way was his and his alone.
行こう。
The egg had been equipped with a vocal function. It would have gasped and shocked at what happened next. The boy, who had only tried to escape up to this point, suddenly shifted his weight. He pointed his feet outwards instead of inwards. On the edge of the rail, he crouched ever so slightly to maintain momentum and gazed at the floating egg.
やれる。距離的に問題はない。
He soared through the night sky. It was a flight that lasted a mere 1.5 seconds. a cordless bungee jump from 100 feet above ground. His destination? The only thing that would stop his fall, the giant flying egg. He shrieked, this time out of elation as he desperately clung to the egg's surface. Just earlier, the cold-blooded witch had told him that without fear, the top of a building would feel no different than a balance beam. This from the same witch that would have been left speechless had she witnessed this spectacle. It was one thing to be fearless and another to be reckless. What the boy did next would give her a headache in days to come. Clinging to the egg, he shifted his gaze away from it. He felt the rapid descent. Tojiro, focusing his half-shut eyes on the ground, leaped off the egg once there was a few feet from the ground, and then turned back to it carefully to re-establish eye contact. Something so unbelievable, though, to Shirjiro. The elevator at the department store and the mysterious floating egg were both just moving objects, virtually indistinguishable from one another.
よし、割れてない。食べ物を粗末にするのは良くないと思う。
He landed near the plaza. A shortcut that had almost cost him his life paid off. Tojiro took off running the second his feet touched the ground. The puppet after Alka was the only thing on his mind. He paid no mind to the moonlight in the sky. Nor to the egg, which was furious about being used and is seconds away from self-destructing and blasting fragments all over the place.
Aozaki!
Nanu?
Aosaki's dumbfounded expression spurred Shojiro on. The curse was complete. The empty egg began to sing its warning to let them know there was no escape. Shrapnel from the egg exploded through the air. The ode to Queen Alice that Alice had engraved onto Dumpty quickly robbed him of his senses.
それはそれとして。
He snapped back to the task at hand and ran to Alko, still lying on the ground. His legs moved as if they'd had a mind of their own. Though he couldn't have stopped them anyway, since could no longer feel them.
お前、驚くほどしつこいぞ。
Wow. The scrambled murder case. Piles of revel became flowers of light blooming on the earth. The final curtain drew close, and the defeat left the battleground. Had Alice Kononji seen it, she would have been beside herself. The two had escaped by a hair's breadth. The only person in a position to witness that rare mutual destruction was the girl who had been saved from it. The boy who'd never stopped running paid it no mind.
死ぬかと。
Safety of the girl Azars meant infinitely more to him than the miracle way in which he had saved her. The moon did not wait for dawn to set. The ornamental texture of the fairy tale kingdom faded away. All of the illusions returned to the way they were before. The ostentatious chorus reverberating through the streets. The puppets welcoming their guests. Peace and quiet reigned once more over a forgotten kingdom never to be awakened again. Out flickered the embers of a late night dream, even the electrical lamps that illuminated the park. Together they watched it disappear. Tojiro lay on the ground, desperately gasping for air like a fish out of water. The curse of the exploding egg had numbed his pain, and he was understandably exhausted after all he experienced. He looked like he could be blown away from the lightest of breezes. While Alko was exhausted, she was still in better shape. Focused on taking deep, even breaths, she was already working to recover her strength.
あのさ、
She addressed Shojiro indifferently as her gaze remained on the amusement park. The abruptness of it was a bit theatrical in nature. She wanted to look at him as she spoke, but her pride was simply too great.
あなた、なんかすごいことしなかった？
The moment she accepted death had seemed like an eternity. She was beside herself in shock about how indifferent she had been as the shards rained down from the moon. But a reassuring voice had snapped her back into reality. Why did he do it? What was he thinking? What a moronic things had he done to pull it off? She had no answers for these questions lying in the ground as she was. All she knew is that he had more than made up for his failure in the House of Mirrors and then some in those fateful final moments. She trusted him, hoping to find the answers, but found herself unable to probe any further. To dig any deeper would feel like defeat, which is why it was unlike her to ask him in the first place. Lucky for her, Shojiro had neither the capacity nor the sensitivity to understand how egocentric she was being.
すごいって、それは青崎の方だろ。
He stuttered between labored breaths. It was taking him so much effort just to breathe that he could not address her properly. She watched him out of the corner of her eye. Thinking back on it, the boy had performed the same role each time. Each and every time, he did what he could in spite of his recklessness? Okay. Recklessness. Backlessness. I don't know that word. It's okay, guys. It's okay. We don't need to know words. We just need to read them. It was far more admirable than her nearly suicidal tactics, even if she did defeat her opponent. He did not recognize how extraordinary his last act of courage was.
提案。あいつをやっつけるのに協力したら、俺のことを見逃してくれる？
At the very least, he had the courage to keep trying whenever he could. A spectator might have viewed him as a supporting actor. His actions were not exactly memorable, but the lead actress he supported did not see it that way.
まあね、認めたくないし、口になんてもっとしたくないけど。
Such inspired actions were wasted in a supporting role. This guy really pulled off the impossible. It was so amazing that she wanted to shout it out loudly as she possibly could for the world to hear.
青崎？
ほんと、人畜無害も遠すぎると侮れないわ。
All Alko could do was sigh. How could she not, even if she was forced to admit that the way he had snatched her from the jaws of death was dashing?
ま、評価、甘めだけど。
Truth be told, he was a lunatic for doing what he did. She steadied her breathing and composed herself. While she was in bad shape, she still had her pride as a mage to consider. That was why she felt a need to maintain an air of dignity.
しずきくん、見逃すのは今日だけって話だったけど、あれ、なしでいいわ。とりあえず、命は助けてあげるから。
She hastily extended her right hand. It was either to shake his or to help him up. However, Tojiro did not take her hand, but instead stood up on his own. This night, despite the sheer insanity that he had just experienced, his face had not once looked as incredulous as it did now.
何そのリアクションは。
She stammered, worried that she had deeply embarrassed herself. Tojiro's gaze was fixed upon Alko. A problem had dawned on Alko. Though she normally hated being stared at, this time she did not mind. Rather, she was enjoying the warmth of his eyes and felt like it was something that she could almost come to appreciate. Don't you get it? This isn't just about friendship, and I don't mean he only likes you either. Believe me when I say that Sonoji really... The conversation came rushing back. It was a memory better left forgotten.
いかん、それは違う。
Pushing Tobimaru's word out of her mind, Ako turned towards Shojiro.
それとこれは別だから。私はあんたのこととかほんとどうでもいいんだから。
Puzzled, Shojiro tilted his head.
さっき嫌いだって言われたけど。
He responded matter-of-factly at her sudden declaration. She certainly had pointed that out, and to his face no less. It appeared it had a mere figures of speech that he was not meant to take literally, but now was not the time to belabor the point.
そうじゃなくて、あなたが私に惚れてても期待しないでって言ってるの。
Yet, belabor she did anyway. Aoko blushed slightly, realizing how inane she was being. She wondered how she ended up in this position. And yet she knew that she had to get this off her chest. All that was left was to politely wait for his response. I can't date you. Such heartbreakingly painful words were too much for the simple boy to hear. His shoulders slumped as if the world was coming to an end, or so Aoko had imagined. On the contrary, Shojiro was sitting there in deep thought.
俺が青崎に惚れてるって？
Shojiro remembered the words as if they were a magic spell. She shot right back with the affirmative. After a moment of deep contemplation, the boy turned to the expectant girl and said,
なんで？
He had to be joking. But he was not. He was completely serious. He liked her, but he didn't like her. Of course, the vice president had jumped to conclusions. This boy had no interest in romance. He probably didn't even know what that was. She was just incredibly embarrassed about how confused Jojiro still appeared to be. Her rosy complexion spread through her entire body.
もう一度聞くけど、なんで？
そりゃこっちが聞きたいわよ。飛び丸の大バカ野郎。
Just like that, she had lost her cool and given an unjustifiable outburst. It was time to seal off the area and destroy all the evidence. Ako's embarrassment devolved into sheer panic, and her grudge against Tobimaru suddenly manifested as a criminal assault. She lashed out with a punch and could have taken down a bird mid-flight. More specifically, it was a brutal right hook. Ako blinked. Her blow had connected with something solid, snapping her out of her reverie. Her temper had lashed out at the completely defenseless Shojiro. It could have been a splendid blow with all her weight behind it, knocking him out cold. Shojiro groaned, crumpling to the ground. Her punch finished the job that the curse had started. If not for the discomfort on his face, it would appear to almost be sleeping. Aoko convinced herself that he was napping, not concussed.
いっか。予定通りになったものね。
The tension in her shoulders eased as she looked down at Shojiro. A ton had gotten in her way over the course of today, but the day was saved, for now. With nobody left to butt heads, she felt exhaustion finally take over her.
うわ、歩いて帰れるかな、私。
Her fatigue was enough to make her complain out loud. When she thought about it, she realized this was the first time she had used up all her magical energy and the first time she had participated in a battle of this scale without any prior preparation. Though in truth,
私一人じゃどっちも相打ちだったっけ。
she felt somewhat proud as she whispered those words. Normally it was something that she would have beat herself up over, but instead she simply shrugged her shoulders with a bitter smile. After all, it was thanks to the person sleeping beside her.
ね、聞こえてないわよね。
As the night had swallowed her voice before it reached him, she received no response. Confident, she continued in an even quieter voice.
その、ありがとう。十分に助けてもらったわ。
Of course, there was no response from Shojiro, and she was not expecting one. Saying it for the record was enough. Naoko watched as Shojiro sleep for a while and then pulled something out of her pocket. It was the palm-sized glass bottle her roommate had given her, which she opened with a pop.
でも、それとこれとは別だから。
Leaving behind the words colder than a winter's chill at night, she called out his name. she barely sensed the bottle moving. The silhouette of the fallen boy appeared to blur, and she got the feeling that the weight of the bottle had increased slightly.
うわ、どうなってんだろうこれ。
What appeared to be a human form could clearly be seen inside of the glass. Alice Kodonchi's tools were mystics that confounded even the most knowledgeable of mages. As soon as Aoko tried to analyze them with logic or reason, she was already out of her depth. Knowing this all too well, Aoko closed the bottle and watched the boy disappear as if by some magic trick.
まったく、こんなの手品じゃなくて魔法だって。
She muttered as she looked into the magical bottle. Its weight not changed significantly, but she had no idea how it worked. But one thing she did know, that there was a human being inside of it. It's lightweight and almost unnerving. Closer to empty air than a human being. It was about as heavy as one would expect if they bottled a summer breeze. Though that it did fit her image of Shoujo perfectly.
アリスの言う通り。
She muttered to no one in particular as she recalled the past.
ほんと、私らしくない。
Aoko wore a bittersweet smile. Her usual moodiness was gone. It was a dangerous world out there, and it was good to have someone keep her on her toes. With a wry chuckle, she flicked the magic bottle with her finger and set off walking. Man, this was a long chapter. She could hear the bell in a distance, signaling the end of the play. An ephemeral dream, an ephemeral, ethereal? No, it's ephemeral. Dream gave way to reality. In the grand scheme of things, it had been but an instant. As the actors exited stage left and the last of the lights silently flickered out. And so the long-dead amusement park played its final role as a memory for a boy and a girl. Ba-da-ba-ba, and we did it! We finally got through episode... We got through the second we got through the Night of Witches chapter 2. We got through it, guys. We did it. Alright, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Cherry Chunks. We will continue with Witch of the Holy Night in the next episode. And we'll find out what like a dog means for the title. Alright. Bye-bye.